All I'm doing is I'm doing my duty, right? So Whistleblower's been in touch with Front Bench, and we have, and a number of questions have come out of that. I think that they're embarrassed. I think they're embarrassed by their connections with Russia. I think that, there has been Russian money that has gone into the Conservative Party.
Emily Thornberry is the Shadow Foreign Secretary and Labour candidate for Islington South. Just before Parliament dissolved ahead of the general election, she began probing the government about a report into Russian interference in British politics. Once the gates of the Palace of Westminster closed, the report couldn't be published. We met her in her constituency for a cup of tea and a chat.
Emily Thornberry, hello.
Hello.
How's it going?
All right, all right. Well, we're just starting with this election campaign, so I'm girding my loins.
Yes. This is the third election in 4 years. Are you tired?
Actually, a friend of mine who is a member of the local party, and he comes to us for Christmas, and he's, I've known him for years and years. And after one canvassing session that we did like 2 weeks ago, he sent me this message which I thought was absolutely right. He said, "Emily, I never see you so relaxed and happy as I do when you're with local activists out on the streets talking to people in Islington." And I think it's true. I think it is the bit of my job that I like the best, to be honest. So I know other people find it a pain, but I really like elections.
The Conservatives are heading the polls, but their campaign is already apparently imploding. I mean, a litany of gaffes yesterday. I mean, we'll start with talk about Jacob Rees-Mogg. I mean, implying that the victims in the Grenfell fire lacked common sense. I mean, what's your assessment of that?
I just thought it was just awful. I found it so distressing to watch. I just thought this man has absolutely no idea at all. I wonder if he's ever been in one of these big tower blocks. The point is that the way that they're built, you do really feel like when you're on one floor, it's absolutely solid. It's got, it's concrete above, it's concrete below. When I lived in tower blocks in Tower Hamlets, and you couldn't hear noise from below or above. And the idea was that it was compartmentalised. So fire starts on one floor, it doesn't spread to others. That's what you're told. And if everybody had tried to get down the stairs at the same time, people would have fallen on top of each other. There would have been mass chaos. The only way you can have big tower blocks like that is if the fire can be kept in particular areas. So I was disgusted. I was disgusted at his lack of knowledge, but most importantly, I was disgusted at his idea that somehow or other he was more clever than anyone else, and that just stinks. That's not a representative of the people. That's somebody who thinks that he's a patrician and that he's above everybody else, and we really should have left that sort of politics behind in the 18th century.
He apologised pretty swiftly afterwards, but
you bet he did.
that came quickly. But then another Tory, Andrew Bridgen, was out there saying that Jacob Rees-Mogg was cleverer.
That's right. Exactly, and that we need to have people who are so much cleverer than everyone else to be running the country. No, you don't. What you need to have politicians who learn from the public and whose politics comes from listening to the public, because we don't know more than they do. We need to be representatives of the people and understand what it is that they want and do our best to deliver what it is that they want.
Do you think it's a case of when you don't think about what you say what you think?
I think that what happened was that he'd relaxed, and I think that he has just, Rees-Mogg has not, has been able to get away with the most extraordinary behaviour. And I think that he just thought that he was untouchable. He relaxed enough and he just showed his true colours.
Speaking of people saying what they think without thinking about it, your Liberal Democrat rival here in Islington, Kate Pothelingham, we spoke to her last week and she had a little slip of the tongue when we were speaking to her about admitting where she lives. She said she doesn't live in the constituency. I've got it on my phone. We can actually watch it together now. Here we go.
Emily Thornberry has a fairly healthy majority. What makes you think you can topple her?
I'm sure she's a fine MP. I don't live in... probably shouldn't say that, should I? I haven't got any criticisms that I want to make of her, but I think people are very focused on Brexit. They want to stay. They're not sure that the Labour Party is going to guarantee remaining in Europe, and they're not certain about Jeremy Corbyn as leader of the party, and it's his name that we hear on the doorstep all the time, I'm afraid.
What do you think of that?
Okay, so she doesn't live in Islington, or she doesn't live in Islington South, and so she doesn't know who I am. Well, that's fine. Although I suppose if she's been involved in campaigning in the area to the extent that you'd expect her to, then maybe she would have learnt a bit by now. The more important thing, though, sorry to be boring, is the politics of it. So what she's saying, right, is she says, oh, I don't want to be anti-democratic. I mean, remember, the Lib Dems' policy is to revoke, right? So the Lib Dem policy is that Swinson is going to be Prime Minister. I mean, we have to say that with a straight face, you know. So she's going to be Prime Minister, and then she's going to revoke. So she's going to basically, without there being another referendum, she's just going to go, no, sorry, we're staying in the European Union. Never mind what anybody says, we're going to stay. Now, that clearly is profoundly anti-democratic, but this Lib Dem candidate actually doesn't talk about that. She talks about Labour's policy, and Labour's policy is that after 3.5 years, what we need to be sure before we leave that this is what the people want. Now that they've seen all the compromises, because during the referendum, people were told all the good things about leaving the European Union, but they weren't told you couldn't have all of them, you could only have some of them, and there had to be compromises. And so now people kind of get the compromises that are necessary. Once we've got a proper deal, and it would be a Labour deal that would be a proper deal, that would do the least amount of damage to our country, we would say to the people, do you want this or do you want to remain? Now, that's what our policy is. So if she thinks that's what we should be doing, she should vote Labour. She should vote Labour because that's what Labour's policy is. And when you hear from Jo Swinson, I think she said yesterday, she said, well, our policy is to revoke, but of course, you know, she's kind of saying, oh, well, you know, if there was a majority of people in Parliament who was in favour of remaining, we could maybe agree to a referendum. So they're kind of trying to do it both ways. So their policy is to revoke, but they're saying they're prepared to compromise and have a referendum. And yet she also says that there is absolutely no way, she categorically rules out having Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister. Well, I'm sorry, girl, but if you're going to have a government that's going to have a referendum, it has to be led by the Labour Party. Do you see what I'm saying? So on the one hand, she's saying, I want to revoke, although if you push me, I'll have a referendum. But I won't have a referendum because I'm not going to support the Labour Party. So basically, if people want to remain in the European Union, we can only do that, in my view, if there's a second referendum on the deal and that is won by the people. The only way you're going to get another referendum is by voting Labour. And if people are voting Lib Dem, they're actually getting in the way of there being a referendum because she won't support Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister. And in any event, her policy is to revoke. Never mind what the Lib Dem candidate in Islington says. I do hope she's not confusing too many people on the doorstep. I mean, I'm telling people, you know, that whether you voted to leave or remain, I don't think you voted for this. We just need to be sure. You know, we're going to put it back to you, and then we will go with whatever you decide. But after 3.5 years of faffing around, we need to be sure. So, really sorry, but there's going to be another vote after the general election if we win. But that is in order to get Brexit done, you know, so that we really can get it fixed. So we're saying we can agree a deal in 3 months. We've been talking to the Europeans, you know, they know what it is we want. And it's basically to be much closer to the European Union, to be in the customs union, to be close to the single market. We've talked it through loads of times. So they know what it is that we can do. We can do that in 3 months. And in the meantime, we can be passing legislation to have a referendum in 6 months. And that's what our plan is.
Last night, Jean-Claude Juncker was interviewed by the BBC, and he said that it seems very unrealistic that Britain would be able to reopen the withdrawal agreement with the European Union.
Yeah, well, I mean, he would say that, wouldn't he? I mean, he did. You know, he said that last time.
You'd be inclined to say that, though, because it dispels your Brexit policy, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, listen, they know what it is that we want, right? Mm-hmm. We've been telling them. We haven't changed. We've been telling them for 3.5 years that, you know, because after the referendum, right, and after, you know, the people decided that they wanted to leave, our view was, right, okay, we're going to go with what the people want, but we need to have a way of leaving the European Union that does the least amount of damage to jobs and the economy. So therefore, we needed to have what some people call a soft Brexit. You know, being in the customs union, which would mean we wouldn't have all this malarkey on the Northern Irish border. We wouldn't be vulnerable to Donald Trump, you know, saying, oh, well, I'll save the British economy by having some sort of, you know, trade deal that will only have a little bit of rat hair in the food and all the rest of it. I mean, it's beyond belief. Anyway, we wouldn't be in that situation. We would have left the European Union, but basically we wouldn't have gone very far. And in the end, 52-48 speaks an essential truth. You know, yes, we have to leave, but no, we don't go far. That's what we were telling them. But the trouble is that we weren't in power. So for 3.5 years, we've been shouting at the Tories saying, please do this, we will agree to this. Listen to what we are saying. If you give us this, we will vote for it. But they wouldn't. And now we're in a situation where we've basically got a really hard Brexit. Everybody is polarised, everybody's taking sides. So we're still trying to be statespeople and hold the country together. And we're saying, look, at a time like this, we just need to be sure what the next step is. But we will negotiate a deal that will be like an insurance policy, so that if we leave, we will leave in such a way that we will still look after jobs and the economy as best we can.
There's a phrase you've used a couple times there.
Yeah.
Least damaging.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any Brexit that could be good for this country?
I think the best deal is to remain in the European Union, and I've always thought that, and I've always been completely honest about it. So for me, it is an insurance policy. It's like the best deal for me is that we remain in the European Union, but if we have to leave, let's leave in a way that does the least amount of damage. And I'm not going to be dishonest about it. That is how I feel. But we'll negotiate the best deal that we can with the European Union. It's in their interest to negotiate a good deal with us, because in the end it won't be for us to decide, it'll be for the public to decide. And if the public decide that we leave, then the European Union needs to have a deal that will do least damage to them as well. So all these people who say, oh, you can't be negotiating a deal with the European Union if it's clear that you want to remain in the European Union. Yes, you can. You just have to negotiate the best deal you can, because in the end it'll be up to the public to decide. Nobody turns it on its head. Like when Theresa May was negotiating a deal, nobody said, well, given that you said that you have to leave no matter what, the European Union could give you a completely rubbish deal, but you know that you have to leave. Do you know what I mean? I mean, it's like, really? No. I mean, let's be straight. We need to negotiate a deal that will look after jobs and the economy as best we can. So that is being in the customs union, being close to the single market, having close alignment on rules and regulations, all the things that Labour has always said. That's what we're going to be negotiating. It'll come as no surprise to anybody. That's what we can do, and we can do it within a few months. We will put that back to the people. We'll find out what they say. If they say that we want to remain, that's fine. Then basically this whole thing goes away. If they say that they want to leave, then at least we know that we'll be leaving in such a way as will look after the economy as best we can in the circumstances. Now, there will be continuing negotiations after that if we decide that we want to leave, clearly, because this is just the first stage, then there's another stage after that. But, And
many others after.
Well, it'll be going on for a while if we decide to leave, because it's like trying to get an egg out of an omelette. It's really complicated and it's quite difficult. And we've been in the European Union for how long? 40 years or something? So, just unravelling all of those relationships is quite difficult.
Now that Parliament's dissolved, the Intelligence and Security Committee no longer exists. The deadline has passed, if you like, for the report that was looking into Russian interference in the EU referendum to be published, because Parliament's no longer sitting. The committee can't publish its report. Explain to me what's been happening there. You were in the Commons yesterday talking about this.
Yeah. So the Intelligence and Security Committee are made up of, they're handpicked by the Prime Minister. They are very senior, discreet, kind of very grown-up grandees across the aisle, and they're people who are very much trusted. And their job is to look into security issues so that we've got some kind of accountability. So this is good. And they've been doing a report into Russian influence on British politics. And obviously, there are always whispers going on. There's always kind of a worry about, bots, about attempts, about Russian money, about attempts to influence, not necessarily to get a particular outcome, but actually just to disrupt. I think that Russian foreign policy is actually, we're not happy with the status quo and we just want to disrupt everybody else. And any time that anyone shows any weakness or anything else, they will be in there and they will take advantage of it as best they can. And we've seen the way in which they can use cyber to undermine democracies, other democracies apart from ours. We don't necessarily have any evidence of it happening here or of them attempting it. We have our suspicions. So they were doing their job. They did an investigation. I think the results of their investigation came out last April. And then it had to be passed by all the, special agencies to make sure there wasn't anything in it that would compromise us or embarrass us. So all of that was, ticked off. And then now it's been sent to number 10 and they're just sitting on it. We were asking yesterday, because the Boris Johnson has to sign it off, we were saying, has he read it yet? We wouldn't even get a straight answer on that, I mean, it's 50 pages or something. I mean, maybe because he doesn't have any pictures in it, he hasn't been able to read it. But you know, we don't even know if he's read it. But the point is that it hasn't been passed, and therefore, as we go into another election, you know, this really important report that might contain things that might warn us about undue influence which is attempted on this election, which is a pivotal election. But they've decided, for whatever reason, that they're going to sit on it. Now, I think I know what the reason is.
Go on.
I think that they're embarrassed. I think they're embarrassed by their connections with Russia. I think that, you know, there has been Russian money that has gone into the Conservative Party. You know, I think that the Leave campaign, you know, there are a lot of questions about that, about, you know, who was doing what and who was pulling whose strings. That does need to be unravelled, it seems to me. These are perfectly legitimate questions. And I have questions, and I've been asking questions about Dominic Cummings, who was in charge of the Leave campaign and who's now the most senior person in Number 10. And I've been asking questions about him. And, you know, on the basis of what I've been told by a whistleblower, which I'm not going to repeat, but, you know, I've said, has he been properly security cleared? I mean, does he have access to all the documents?
I mean, you would imagine, sir, if he's Boris Johnson's top advisor, that he'd received security clearance.
Yeah, he may have. I'm sure that there are lots of different levels of security clearance. So there's the deepest form of security clearance, which means that you're properly trusted, like the people, like the guys on the ISC. You know, this committee that have done this report. You know, clearance like them. So does he have clearance on the same level? He's in the most pivotal position in Number 10. If there's documents going through on, I don't know, on Russia or Ukraine or whatever, is he allowed to see them? And if he isn't, why isn't he? And if he is, are they sure that's a good idea? We just need to have these questions answered, but I haven't had any answers on any of that. They just say, they don't deny it, which is really interesting. They don't deny it. They're kind of fairly abusive. You know, these lefties, you know, conspiracy theories. They don't say, no, he's not. No, this is outrageous. He hasn't said anything about it. There are no denials coming out. So let's see. Let's see what happens next. So I think the ISC report asks a number of questions, and they don't want those questions even to be asked. You know, they don't want us to see the information about any potential Russian influence or attempted influence on our elections or on our democracy. And they're worried that that may lead to other questions, particularly those about Dominic Cummings and the Leave campaign. They don't want to open this can of worms. But I think we should be opening this can of worms. We should be an open and confident democracy, and we should look the issues in the eye. You know, to make that allegation about Dominic Cummings, the implication is that our security forces, our intelligence services, the police, that potentially a Russian agent or someone who has suspect connections to Russia is literally at the seat of our government. That's a really, really hefty thing to be accusing them of. What I'm doing is I'm doing my duty, right? So Whistleblower's been in touch with Front Bench, and a number of questions have come out of that, and I have asked those questions. I just want to know, or we need to be sure. Right? And so, and perhaps the most important question is, you know, what security clearance has he had, and how deep has it been, and how many, you know, is he at the moment excluded from particular areas of information, and if he is, why is that happening? You know, it's for me to ask the questions, and it really should be for them to provide the answers, and the public should know this. People will counter you and say that if anyone in the top tier of our politics has form on Russia, they could point to Jeremy Corbyn's response to the poisonings in Salisbury and his slight ambivalence to come down on the Russians in the wake of that. Yeah, I don't quite understand this. I know a great deal has been made of this. And then I look and I just say, well, people assert that, but what did Jeremy say? What Jeremy said was, this is a terrible thing that's happened. We need to gather in the evidence. I'm not prepared to just jump to the conclusion it's the Russians. I mean, my view was slightly different. I said, like being a lawyer, I said, you know, the prima facie evidence is, on the face of it, the evidence is it's likely to be Russia. But of course, we should be looking at the evidence. So it's just a slight difference, but both of us wanted to look at the evidence. Nobody's criticised me. You know, why do they do this? You know, why do they because they do this because he's like our main message carrier, because he's the leader of the Labour Party. He's the one they really go for. And they get away with it. I mean, do you remember they were saying that he was a Czech agent at one stage? I mean, honestly, you know, they just chuck this stuff around and hope that some of the dirt will stick. What's the difference between that and what you're saying about Dominic Cummings? we have had approaches by whistleblowers, and we take seriously what they say, and we feel that we have a duty to ask these questions.
Okay. Just finally, Emily Thornberry, we've seen a number of MPs not opt for re-election this time around. Now, obviously, that happens every time there's a general election. There's always people that stand down. But in this instance, there seems to be a certain tone, particularly women, particularly One Nation Tories, who are deciding not to stand again, and in several instances, they're citing abuse as a factor. What's your assessment of that?
I spoke to one of them, a man actually, and I like him, and I've worked with him on and off, for sort of 15 years, all the time I've been there. So I said to him, well, what's going on? And he said, oh, well, I've decided to stand. Blah 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 kind of answer. So I said, it's not your Tory party anymore, is it? And he said no. And when you say, One Nation Tories, I mean, the Conservative Party has changed. And I think that a lot of people who felt that they were in the mainstream of politics don't feel that they have a place in the Conservative Party anymore. I think that the Conservative Party has taken a handbrake turn off to the right. And people don't feel they have a place there. I mean, maybe they're hoping that it'll be short-lived and they'll be able to come back. I hope they are. I hope that they're able to, because I think that it doesn't do our country any good to have this kind of division, in my view. So, associated with that, we have all of the language that the Prime Minister has unfortunately used, the kind of the tone of the election. There's all this kind of die-in-a ditch stuff, this, saying that concerns that people have about abuse being humbug, et cetera, et cetera. The tone comes from the top very often, and I think it's irresponsible. I think that a democracy like ours has taken hundreds of years to pull together, and we can lose it. We realise how delicate it now is, and we just can't take it for granted. And sure, people are upset with politicians, and we don't seem to have got anywhere in relation to Brexit. I get that. As I say, my answer is, don't point the finger at us, we haven't been in power. But, it does seem like, we've got ourselves stuck and people are frustrated. I get that. But we are only people in the end. I'm part of my community. I need to be confident that I can just mix with my community because I need to spend my time with them and listen from them. But if the threat level is such that people are uneasy about even meeting the public, then we really are going in the wrong direction, aren't we?
Absolutely, and just for the sake of balance, I would say it's not just Boris Johnson who's used violent language in the past. There are Labour MPs who've done it. Jess Phillips, to quote, would be, I won't knife you in the back, I'll knife you in the front, I think was that effect she said in the past. Yeah. What's the solution to this? How do we introduce a level of respect or some decency and cool things down a little bit, do you think?
Well, I think the most divisive issue of all of the issues is Brexit. So I do think that, deciding that what we're going to do is we just need to make the decision on Brexit and then go with it. I think that's the really important one, and that's why our policy about having another referendum, actually, some people say, oh, well, wouldn't that be divisive? Well, no, it's just something we have to go through. We have to be sure. And I think everybody has to sign up to that and say, look, no more arguing, no more fighting. We'll have the result of the ISC report. We'll learn from that. We'll make sure that there's no undue influence. We will make sure we have a proper referendum, and then listen to people, what it is that they want, and just go with it, and that'll be it. And then we can move on. But we can't do it at the moment. We certainly can't just let Boris Johnson ram through his version of Brexit, because it's going to cost us a great deal. And as people lose their jobs and as our economy goes south, people will get angry, and understandably they'll get angry.
Emily Thornberry, thank you.
It's all right. Okay.